and what you think, and whether or not you're thinking what you're thinking, your conclusions are what they are because that's what you've always been told, or if your conclusions are what you really believe because you've actually looked at it from an exterior perspective and evaluated all the possibilities and drawn your own conclusion. Not because that's what you were always told by some chump who's, oh yeah, he's the king, he's the whatever. And so some folks that I've discussed this with believe that Eve biting the apple was creating the greatest sin in the history of mankind, which was giving mankind the freedom to choose, and thus some will inevitably choose to go away from the path and steer from the path. So think about that. Some are saying that the ability to choose is what God wanted you to have. Then at the same time, some of them will argue that Eve biting the apple, which gave us free will and made us mortal, is a terrible evil thing. There's a contradiction in your argument right there, or your belief right there. Other people are believing that Eve biting the apple is a great thing, it set us free, and that Lucifer always wanted predestination, and that God's plan was to compel Eve in a particular way, whichever way that may be, because everybody believes differently, that to bite the apple and thus set man free. But then those people sometimes will come right back and say, but then Jesus Christ willingly sacrificed himself. And some people say, well, he was sent to this world to sacrifice himself, part of a grander plan. Well, what is it? His choice, or was it part of a grander plan? In order to sacrifice himself, because he's God's son on earth in mortal form, for the sin of mankind. Which came from what? Which came from Eve biting the apple? But you just said a moment ago, this group of people, that Eve biting the apple was a good thing because that's what brought in free will, and which led to our mortality. And thus we got to have the taste of this life and then go on to something else, the spirit world, or whatever it is you refer to heaven as. And that's a good thing, but then you say Jesus Christ was a necessary sacrifice for the sin of mankind that came from that. So that again, to me, seems rather odd. That seems at odds with one another, almost like you are suggesting that Jesus Christ being crucified was a terrible thing because he was the Son of God and I worship him. But at the same time, it had to happen because, well, Eve did what was right and gave us free will. And so the Son of God had to be sacrificed. But my goodness, it's just the most terrible thing ever. And so you see what I'm saying? There's contradictions left and right all around you. And it depends on who the hell you're talking to. And that's one very complex thing about Christianity, is how diluted Christian beliefs have become. Because every time you turn around, there's a new preacher popping up saying, well, you know, I have the real Word of God. You know, I know the truth because I read the Bible, I read the Old Testament, I read the New Testament, and now I know the truth. And so they start up their own damn church, and they call it whatever the hell they want to call it. You know, Dick's Congregation for the Truth of Christ, or whatever the hell name they want to put to it, when in reality they want a Mercedes-Benz and they want to live on the hill, and so they're going to convince you to come in because they got the Word. And, you know, look, no, I'm not going to say that. But here's what I believe. I just want to get that out there to point out that there's a lot of contradictions embedded in a lot of different arguments, but I think that there's a lot of confusion because of how diluted it's become throughout the years. And remember, it goes all the way, Tocqueville talked about it in 1835, so it was going on then. But here's what I believe.